Give me some good news, will you?
Well, I will. So Monday, Missouri versus Biden is being argued at the Supreme Court, and it is, as we've talked about before, it's the most important free speech case in the history of the country, certainly in a generation, because it deals with the federal government in this vast censorship enterprise coercing, colluding, cajoling these social media giants to censor speech. And what the judge found at the lower court, when I filed it when I was Attorney General in Missouri, what the judge found at the lower court was that this was almost exclusively conservatives being censored. It reeked of viewpoint discrimination, which violates the First Amendment. And it was Orwellian. I mean, what was uncovered, Glenn, were tens of thousands of pages of emails and text messages from high-ranking government officials to social media giants saying, take it down, or we're going to launch an investigation, or we're going to, we're going to sue you under antitrust issues. I mean, really, the full power of the federal government was being used to suppress dissent, to silence Americans. And so that's been shown in the case. And so that now it's been appealed by the government. They want to continue to censor people, and the Supreme Court's going to hear oral arguments on that on Monday.
And how do you think it's going to go?
I'm hopeful. I just think, the case is a lot of it will come down to what was the government actually doing, and were they, in fact, coercing, right? Were they using the power of the federal government to get these social media giants to do the things that they can't legally do themselves? What makes this case unique is typically social media companies are sued by people who've been deplatformed or their posts have been taken down, and those go to the Northern District of California, and they're never going to be seen again. But what's unique in our case is that we've sued the federal government itself and the actors like Jen Psaki and Anthony Fauci. I had a chance to take Anthony Fauci's deposition, took Elvis Chan's deposition, who was, of course, the FBI agent in charge, who was pre-bunking the Hunter Biden laptop story, calling it Russian disinformation, a hack and leak operation, even though they had the laptop already. They were pre-bunking this, getting ready for 2020. The COVID, the efficacy of masks, they were suppressing that speech, vaccine issues, origins of COVID, where they were shutting anybody down who talked about this coming from the lab in Wuhan. And so all that's uncovered in this lawsuit. And if it wasn't for this lawsuit, Glenn, and then later Elon Musk buying Twitter with the Twitter files, and then later some of the congressional hearings, this stuff would still be in the dark. It would still be a conspiracy theory, but it was happening. And what we refer to it in the lawsuit is a vast censorship enterprise. The number of agencies and people involved here is breathtaking. And the, sometimes willing behavior of social media companies to comply and deplatform and censor people. But in some instances, they actually didn't want to do it.
Right.
And they changed their rules. So
that's why I wanted to ask you about. How much of this do you think was willing, and how much of it was fear of the government?
Both. So, these social media platforms typically were very aligned with the left. I think in many instances, Facebook, for example, after 2016 and Donald Trump won, they made it clear publicly they were never going to let that happen again. Right? They were never going to let that happen again. And so I think some of this was overtly political on their part, and they were willing participants. But there are documents that were uncovered where they were pushing back. It is not, it didn't violate their terms of service. And as one judge said in one of the previous arguments, that's a nice social media company you have there, right? It'd be a shame if something happened to it. Almost like a mob boss.
Oh, yeah, that is mob.
Coming from the government.
That is
mob. So this is, again, all the power that the federal government has, exerting that on these social media companies to do what they can't legally do themselves, which is to censor. And so this case is it's hard for me, as somebody who believes deeply in the right to free speech and what that means for a country and freedom. This is, in my view, one of the most important cases in general the court's heard in a very, very long time.
Yeah.
But certainly as it relates to the First Amendment.
How is this going to
be important? Because we're dealing with the virtual town square now, Glenn.
How is this going to affect the the new systems that they're putting in for mis and disinformation, and the government's work with Five Eyes and with social media and the rest of the media, where they are just training them and guiding them through mis and disinformation. Will this case have anything to do with that? Because that's upon us right now.
Absolutely. And so that is the intention of this, too, is to bust that up. Because there's agencies like CISA that most people have never heard of.
Right.
But was very involved, Glenn.
Explain to the audience what CISA is.
It's basically the agency that was created not that long ago to deal with sort of cybersecurity.
Right.
Okay. And what it found itself doing during COVID in particular was, under the guise of disinformation and misinformation, as you clearly articulated, that's a ploy by wannabe tyrants to control speech.
Yes.
The truth of the matter is, you get to say your opinion, even if somebody else thinks it's wrong. The government doesn't get to shut that down. The government doesn't get to tell you what you can say and what you can hear. It's up to the individual to decipher what they, how they want to move forward and what they, as they analyze facts and what their decisions are, right? It was sort of like with the mandates, like with mask mandates. People can make their own decisions. They can judge if this is a good thing or not for their family. Same with the vaccine. And so all of this was about command and control from these sprawling agencies. And the other thing that was exposed in this too, Glenn, is there were universities. The University of Washington and Stanford were involved with helping sort of determine what the disinformation and misinformation was. So again, they're outsourcing this to their sort of web of allies to censor Americans. And this case would prevent that. This case, if the court rules the right way, and I hope that they do, it would essentially, there would be an injunction on all these agencies from engaging in that kind of activity. That'd be a huge win. Now, no matter what happens, the case, of course, stands for exposing all of this, but the remedy that hopefully will play out is preventing this. But as we've talked about before, I've got legislation in the Senate that would empower individuals to sue individual government actors if they've been censored. If they're right to
that would be helpful.
Censored, you can go sue. Yeah, it would, because instead of just one AG in a state suing, you'd have an army of citizens being able to stand up for their First Amendment rights.
The Treasury, I think, in cooperation, I'd have to look this up. I think it was the World Bank or, I don't know, some world organization got together and ran a kind of a war game with the central banks around the world. And one of the things that came out of that was, we have got to shut down voices. And this is an exact quote. We have to shut down voices that disagree, in the case of an emergency, a financial emergency, that disagree with the actions of the central banks, even if they are correct, because they could further the collapse of the system. And I've been saying on the air for a while now, I know I'm not going to agree with the global central banks on whatever it is they're planning to do. The people who created the problem, I don't want designing a new system or anything else. And that snuffs out freedom of speech quickly.
It does. And I think what you're seeing play out in real time is the broad diffusion of information, which is good. That's good. The democratization of how people get information. You're sort of on the front lines of all this a long time ago, but what they really fear is that individuals will then, take different inputs and make up their own minds, as opposed to three networks that tell you everything they want you to hear. Mm-hmm. And again, I just think that we ought to be unafraid, I think, as conservatives, to talk about this. Is about freedom. This is about liberty. This is about making up your own mind. And they know how powerful that idea is. They absolutely. So what's the game plan? You saw it play out in COVID, which is create a crisis, whether it's real or manufactured, right?
Yep.
And then you consolidate power, you fearmonger, the othering of those who are dissenting. I mean, go back in time just a little bit. They were, in Australia, which we thought was kind of like us, but with cute animals. They had camps. I
know.
They had camps. People were being arrested in parks for not wearing masks. I mean, we can't memory hole all this stuff. That is a glimpse of the kind of world that some of these folks want to live in if you disagree with the regime. And we have to fight back with everything we have to make sure that doesn't happen. And that it also depends on us defending somebody else's right to say something we really disagree with. That's sort of the hallmark of it. But they want to bulldoze all that going in to have a regime narrative, and anybody that stands in the way is othered, marginalized, called all sorts of names, lose their job, deplatformed. I mean, that is so this whole lecture we get from Joe Biden on threats to democracy. We have seen the threats. We have seen the threat, and it is Joe Biden's administration with this censorship enterprise and trying to throw political opponents in jail. So I think people are waking up to this, and I think we just got to stand up for it.
Good. Thank you, Eric. I appreciate it. We'll be watching Monday. If maybe you'll come back Monday or Tuesday, and you could tell us how it went, and dissect the arguments back and forth between the two. Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it.
Sure thing. Thanks, man.
Senator Eric Schmitt from Missouri.